Daisy and the Trouble with Vampires. By Cass Gray. To the Addams Family. Chapter 1. The trouble with vampires is people shouldn't be allowed to dress up as them. Or talk about them. Or even think about them. Especially at Halloween. Vampires can be really scary at Halloween. So can all the other Halloween scary things. Not that anything scares me or anything. It's just that when people like Jack Beachwhistle keep talking about scary things at school all the time, including vampires, then after a while, things can get a bit scary-ish. Nothing scares me most of the time, at least not during the daytime anyway. Vampires don't scare me in the daytime, zombies don't scare me in the daytime, or ghosts or werewolves or even the Hooly Hooly Man. They did scare me a little bit on actual Halloween night, but that was different, because Halloween night is the scariest night in the world, especially if you go trick-or-treating for the first time with an actual vampire, who isn't an actual vampire, but you think she is, because she told you she is, but then she tells you she isn't, but by then you've already decided she is. Because grown-ups aren't meant to tell fibs or even say the word vampire, especially if you haven't been trick-or-treating before. Which isn't my fault. Chapter 2. Did you know Halloween is short for Hello, we know something you don't know? I didn't either. Jack Beachwhistle told me as soon as I walked into school with Gabby last Monday. The trouble with someone telling you that they know something you don't know is it makes you want to know what it is. Even if it's Jack Beachwhistle doing the telling. Trouble is, I'd forgotten it was the beginning of Halloween week. The trouble with Halloween week is I didn't know that there was even such a thing as Halloween week. I thought there was just Halloween night. But Jack said he wasn't waiting until Saturday for Halloween to begin. As far as he was concerned, we should start getting afraid on Monday. Not just afraid either. Very afraid. When me and Gabby told him we weren't afraid of anything, Jack said he knew things that were so scary they would make the blood freeze in our veins. Plus, if we didn't believe him, then we should ask Colin and Harry. The trouble with Colin and Harry is they are Jack Beachwhistle's best friends, so they agree with everything he says. Even if the things Jack says are a bunch of whopping fibs. Me and Gabby told all three of them that we absolutely totally weren't listening to anything they had to say about Halloween week, and that if they kept saying things that were scary, we would tell Mrs. Peters. Mrs. Peters is our teacher and she can be proper scary. Trouble is, instead of saying more scary things to us, Jack said them to other people instead. Hello, we know something you don't know, he said, getting everyone to gather around him in the playground and then making evil slurping noises with his mouth. The trouble with Jack making evil slurping noises is that it makes you want to hear what he is going to say next. So we had to listen. Especially as it was a story about a haunted drinking fountain. According to Jack, the drinking fountain in our playground gets its water from the wicked well. The trouble with the wicked well is it's full of wicked frogs and wicked newts, which means if you drink from it at midnight on Halloween night when there's a full moon, you'll be chased by werewolves. Me and Gabby told everyone that everything Jack was saying was a lie. But Jack said, if we'd never drunk from our school fountain at midnight on Halloween night when there was a full moon, how could we be sure? Which was kind of true and really annoying, because we couldn't prove he was fibbing. Jack said the only way to defend yourself against werewolves is to shoot them with a gun that fires silver bullets. Or a crossbow that fires silver crossbow bolts. Or a massive castle catapult that fires silver boulders. Werewolves are allergic to silver. There were other scary things he said too. Did you know that if you hang your coat up on a certain coat hook in the classroom at midnight on Halloween night when there is a full moon, then the ghost of an evil headmaster from 10 centuries ago will float down the corridor wearing your coat and going W00000000? Me and Gabby told everyone that there were no such things as haunted coat hooks or haunted headmasters, but Jack said, if we'd never hung up a coat in school at midnight on Halloween night when there was a full moon, how could we be sure? Which was kind of true again, and even more annoying this time because do you know what he said next? He said that the most haunted coat hook in our classroom was the one I hang my coat on. And the second most haunted was Gabby's. And he didn't stop there either. He told us that pencil cases can be haunted, pencil sharpeners can be haunted, rubbers can be haunted, even bendy rulers can be haunted. What a load of fibs! Trouble is, Colin and Harry totally backed him up, so some people in our class thought it was true. Paula Potts wouldn't even open her pencil case when we sat down for lessons in case a haunted compass tried to stab her. And it didn't stop there either. Jack didn't stop telling scary stories on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, or even Friday. He kept telling us things we didn't know and didn't even want to know all week. Chapter 3. When I met my mom after school on Monday, I told her all about Jack. Daisy, she said, Jack and his friends are just trying to give you the heebie-jeebies. There are no such things as werewolves, werfoxes, werchickens, or wereanythings. What about werpuddles? I asked. Jack says, if you tread in a puddle at midnight on Halloween night when there's a full moon, you'll turn into a wergoldfish. There are no such things as wergoldfish either, said my mom. You shouldn't believe a single word Jack Beachwhistle says. As soon as I was totally sure that Jack had been telling lies all day, I felt much better. I felt even happier when Mum told me that my nanny and Grampy would be coming for Sunday lunch the day after Halloween. I love Sunday lunch, especially when we sit at the table and have a tablecloth and everything. It feels so special. Can we have a roast dinner? I said. Yes, said my mom. Can we have crackling? I asked. Yes, said my mom. Can we have roast potatoes? I asked. Yes, we can have roast potatoes, said my mom. You forgot Yorkshire puddings, whispered Gabby. Can we have Yorkshire puddings? I asked. Yes, we can have Yorkshire puddings, said my mom. Can we not have peas? I asked. Yes, we cannot have peas, sighed my mom. Or Brussels, I laughed. Definitely no Brussels, said my mom, smiling. But we can have gravy, I said. Yes, we can definitely have gravy, said my mom. If you're extra good, I'll make a trifle too. Before I said goodbye to Gabby, we made a BFF pact never to listen to Jack Beachwhistle again. Unless we can't help it, she said. Unless we have no choice, I said. Because he's talking too loud, said Gabby. Or we're standing too close, I said. Apart from that, we are absolutely totally not going to listen to one single word Jack Beachwhistle says ever again. Absolutely totally, said Gabby, opening her front gate and giving me a wave goodbye. Pinky promise, I said, giving her a wiggle wave back. Pinky promise, she shouted, wiggling her little finger back at me and then closing her front door. Pinky double promise, I shouted, holding both my little fingers up and then remembering to tell my mom not to forget the applesauce. I love applesauce. Especially on roast dinners. Chapter 4. The trouble with Pinky double promises is they are really hard to keep, especially during Halloween week. You'll never guess what Jack Beachwhistle said to everyone in the playground on Tuesday. He said 666 is the devil's telephone number. Which means if you play hopscotch in the school playground during Halloween week and you miss square 6 3 times in a row, your head will explode. It was a good job Gabby and me had been listening, because if we hadn't, we wouldn't have been able to tell everyone that Jack was telling whopping fibs again. How do you know I'm fibbing? Said Jack. Because no one would ever play hopscotch in the school playground at midnight on Halloween night when there's a full moon. I shouted. Did I say anything about midnight? Asked Jack. No 0000000, said Harry, shaking his head really slowly. Did I even mention a full moon? Asked Jack. No, said Colin, shaking his head even more slowly than Harry did. All I said was if you play hopscotch in the school playground during Halloween week, said Jack, stroking his chin and then giving me the evils with his eyes. The trouble with Jack Beachwhistle giving you the evils with his eyes is it makes you want to give him the evils back. Trouble is, before I had even got my eyebrows into the right position, he had started clapping his hands, stamping his foot and shouting, "Dare! Dare! Dare!" The trouble with someone shouting "Dare! Dare! Dare!" in the playground is it makes everyone else shout it too. Even when they're meant to be on your side. Dare! 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 If you're so sure that I'm fibbing, said Jack, then you won't be afraid to play Halloween hopscotch in front of us right here, right now, will you? He laughed. Stand back, everyone! You don't want to get Daisy's brains all over you when her head explodes. It was no good. Everyone was looking at me now, even Gabby. Not only that. The dare! 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 Shouts had got even louder. Gabby told me I should take absolutely no notice of the dare 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 shouts, but I absolutely had no choice. I was absolutely going to have to play Halloween hopscotch whether I wanted to or not. Even if my head ended up exploding. Even if my brains ended up going all over the playground. Luckily, I had a plan. My plan was to spend so long throwing my stone from square number 1 to square number 5, I wouldn't have time to even get to number 6 before the lunch bell went. Unluckily, Jack had a plan too. He said I could start at square number 6. The trouble with starting at square number 6 is it means you're in the danger zone straight away. Because you haven't had a chance to practice your stone throwing. Or rolling. Or anything. So I thought of another plan. My second plan was to spend so long looking for a stone to throw that the bell would ring before I even had a chance to start playing. Only Jack had a second plan too. He got Colin and Harry to get a stone for me. When I said the stone they got me wasn't the right shape for rolling or throwing, the dare. Dare! Dare! Shouts changed to chicken. Chicken! Chicken, shouts, so I had to start playing straight away. The trouble with playing straight away is it's really hard to roll or throw a stone straight onto a number 6 hopscotch square. Especially if you're using a wrong-shaped stone, double especially if you haven't had any practices, and triple especially if the chicken. Chicken! Chicken, shouts change to miss. Miss! Miss, shouts. Miss. Miss. Miss, shouts can really put you off. So I missed. I tried really hard, but I still missed. As soon as my stone rolled past the number 6 square, everyone apart from Gabby started cheering. Which was so wrong. Because I would never want to see someone's head explode in the playground playing hopscotch. Not even Jack Beachwhistle's. But they still kept doing it. And doing it and doing it. So I missed again. Which meant I only had one throw left. The trouble with only having one throw left is it makes you think you're definitely going to miss again, especially when the miss. Miss. Miss, shouts change to explode. Explode. Explode, shouts. The more I heard explode, the smaller the number 6 square looked. The smaller the number 6 square looked, the harder it got for me to aim. The harder it got for me to aim, the surer I was that I was going to miss. So I missed again by quite a long way actually. As soon as my stone bounced past the number 10 square, everyone around me jumped back and covered their ears. Apart from Gabby. Gabby knew all along that my head wasn't going to explode. So did I actually. Which is why I wasn't really bothered whether I missed or not. Ha! I said to Jack Beachwhistle, pointing at my head with both of my pointing fingers. Who's the fibber now? But Jack just folded his arms. I didn't say when your head would explode, he grinned, I just said it would explode. Honestly, that boy is the worst. The trouble with doing afternoon lessons thinking your head is about to explode is it makes it really hard to concentrate. Was I pleased to hear the school bell ring at the end of the day? When I met Mum outside the school gates, I asked her straight away if my head was actually going to explode. Daisy, I told you yesterday not to take any notice of Jack Beachwhistle, she said. If he knows he can wind you up, then he will wind you up. So, just ignore him. So that's what me and Gabby definitely, absolutely, totally decided we would do. We wouldn't look at Jack Beachwhistle. We wouldn't go near Jack Beachwhistle. In fact, we would never listen to Jack Beachwhistle ever again. Quadruple Pinky Promise. Chapter 5. You'll never guess what Jack said to us on Wednesday. Apart from hello, we know something you don't know. He said there's a zombie graveyard buried under our classroom. The trouble with having a zombie graveyard under your classroom is that if it's midnight on Halloween night when there's a full moon, the zombies can wake up. Apparently when a load of zombies all wake up at the same time, it's called a zombie rising. But if they all wake up and decide to take over the world, it's called a zombie invasion. Rising invasion. Gabby told Jack that he was the biggest liar in the world, because once you're dead, so you can't wake up, because to wake up you have to be able to open your eyes, and to be able to open your eyes you have to be alive, not dead, but Jack said that's how zombies work. Their deadness is so alive, they can rise up out of their graves, dig themselves out of the ground with their long creepy fingernails, and then hold their arms out and come and get you. When I asked Jack what zombies are made of, he said, evil gunge. He said the gunge inside a zombie is so evil that bullets can't stop them, missiles can't stop them, even the SAS can't stop them. If you want to fight a zombie, then the only way to defeat them is to fight gunge with gunge, Jack said. Especially at midnight on Halloween night when there's a full moon. When I went back to my desk after break on Wednesday, the only thing I could think about was the zombie under my feet. Gabby told me there weren't any zombies under my feet. She said I shouldn't be listening to a word Jack Beachwhistle says. Trouble is, it definitely felt like there was a zombie underneath me. Especially when I opened my desk lid. The trouble with desk lids is that mine creaks. I'm sure it never used to creak, but it definitely creaked on Halloween Wednesday. When I told Jack Beachwhistle about the creak at lunchtime, he said it might not have been my desk lid that I'd heard creaking. He said it might have been the evil rusty hinges of a zombie coffin lid opening right beneath my feet. Not during Halloween night, during maths. The trouble with the lid of a zombie coffin is once it's open the zombie can climb out. The trouble with zombies climbing out is it could be the start of a zombie rising or invasion. When I told Gabby that a zombie rising or invasion was about to start right underneath my desk, she said I was being silly. She said, first there are no such things as zombies, second there are no such things as zombie risings or invasions, and third, even if there were, the zombies would be no match for Mrs. Peters. Trouble is, Gabby hadn't noticed my school socks. The trouble with my school socks is I always pull them right up in the morning when I put them on. Only when I looked down at my socks after lunch, they weren't pulled up at all. Both of them were pulled right down. It was almost as if a zombie had reached through the classroom floor during lessons and used his creepy fingernails to pull my socks down when I wasn't looking. I sat cross-legged on my chair after that until Mrs. Peters told me to sit properly. Even then I didn't put my feet on the floor. I'm telling you, if there was going to be a zombie invasion in our classroom on Wednesday afternoon, there was no way I was going to be the first one to get grabbed. When I told Mom about my school socks, she said she was starting to think she was the only person on the planet who hadn't gone Halloween crazy. School socks, she said. A zombie has pulled down your school socks? My mom doesn't believe in Halloween. I think that's why we have never gone trick-or-treating together. Or carved a pumpkin. Or had a Halloween party at our house. The only Halloween party LV ever been to was at Vicky Caro house. Which is a good thing actually, because a Halloween party with my mom around would be no fun at all. I told you Jack Beachwhistle would wind you up if you let him, she said. Hasn't he got any homework to do? Hasn't he got a football to kick around in the playground? He prefers telling Halloween stories, I told her. Well, I'd prefer it if you stopped listening to them, she said. The next time Jack starts telling Halloween stories, promise me you will cover your ears. I promise, Elle fibbed. Chapter 6. Did you know there are 3 main types of ghost? Jack Beachwhistle told us about them during morning break time on Thursday. At first me and Gabby weren't going to listen, but we were standing quite close by, so we had to. According to Jack, the 3 main types of ghosts are 1. Normal ones. 2. Ugly ones. 3. Headless ones. Normal. Ugly. Headless. Normal-looking ghosts are ghosts who have died normally. You know, they might have lived to about 100 and then died of old age. But the ones with the really bad attitude are the ugly ones. Ugly ones wear sheets over their heads so you can't see how ugly they really are. Gabby said if she was a ghost, she'd much rather be an ugly one because the uglier you are, the more scary you would be. She said if you were a really ugly ghost and you lived in a castle, you could scare all the attackers away by just poking your head up over the battlements and going W00000000. But Jack said that isn't how ghosts with sheets over their heads work. They do go W000000, but they also do much worse things than that. At first, me and Gabby didn't believe him, but when he started whispering, we knew it must be true. Apparently, a ghost with a sheet over its head won't just chase after you going W000000. If it catches you and gets really close, it will suddenly lift its sheet up and show you how ugly it is underneath. If you look straight at it with frightened eyeballs, you turn to stone. The trouble with being turned to stone is you have to stand really still all the time. And it makes you really heavy. Imagine going to the swimming baths after you've been turned to stone. Or doing PE. And that's not all you have to be afraid of during Halloween week either. According to Jack, it isn't just sheets with ghosts under them that you have to watch out for, it's ordinary sheets too. And blankets and bath towels and tea towels and t-shirts and flannels, and even socks. Jack says, if you have a laundry basket in your house on Halloween night and it's piled up with things that haven't been ironed, they can turn into ghosts too. Especially at midnight on Halloween night when there's a full moon. How scary is that? When I asked Jack how to defend yourself against a haunted tea towel, he said you have to pin it to the clothes error with silver clothes pegs. Trouble is, my mom's clothes pegs are red, yellow, green and blue. Gabby and me were really pleased when the bell went, because it meant Jack had to stop telling us things we didn't know or want to know and we could go back to lessons. Trouble is, when we came back out for lunch, he told us about headless ghosts too. The trouble with headless ghosts is they haven't got any heads. Which means they haven't got any mouths, eyes, or ears either. Which means they can't go W000000, they can't see where they are going, and they can't hear how noisy they are being when they bump into things in the night. Jack says the proper name for headless ghosts is POULTRYGISTS. Or at least, I think that's what he said. I wonder if headless ghosts can get headaches. Chapter 7. The next day Jack's stories got even scarier. Hello, we know something you don't know. Jack, Colin and Harry shouted the moment me and Gabby walked into the playground on Halloween night eve morning. Did you know all your mums could be witches in disguise? Our mums don't look anything like witches. I told them. Witches have warts and whiskers and long pointy noses. Our mums don't have warts or whiskers or long pointy noses, said Gabby. Maybe not at the moment, they don't, Jack said, but what about at midnight on Halloween night when there's a full moon? According to Jack, Harry and Colin, there are far more witches around than you'd ever realize. There are white witches and black witches and even sand witches. The trouble is, most of the time they are dressed in totally ordinary clothes. The trouble with totally ordinary clothes is they make people look totally ordinary. I wear ordinary clothes, Gabby wears them, you wear them, everyone wears them. Trouble is, so do our mums. The trouble with mums who wear totally ordinary clothes is, if they were actually real witches, you would never know. Especially if they can do spells on themselves that make their faces look ordinary too. Jack Beachwhistle said that, in the olden days, mums who were witches were really easy to spot, because not only did they have warts and whiskers and pointy noses, they wore black clothes, black shoes, black stockings and black pointy hats. So, to stop themselves from being spotted, chased and captured, they decided to become secret witches instead. With secret broomsticks too. According to Jack, every secret witch has a spell that can make her broomstick go undercover. Before the spell, it would look like this. But after the spell it could look like this. This. Or even this. According to Jack, the only way to defend yourself against a secret witch is to take away her magic wand. Trouble is, secret witches have spells that make their magic wands go undercover too. Before the spell it would look like this. But after the spell it could look like this. 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 Or even this. You don't think your mum could be a secret witch, do you? Asked Gabby as we walked back to class after morning break. No way, I said. Has your mum got a broom in her cupboard? She asked. Yes, I said. Mine too, gulped Gabby. Does your mum have a mop in her cupboard? She asked. Yes, I said. Mine too, gulped Gabby. And a hoover, we both said together. And a pepper pot and a wooden spoon and a toothbrush and a razor, I whispered. A razor? Gasped Gabby. Not in the broom cupboard, I said. In the bathroom cupboard. Why would your mum need a razor? To shave her legs, I think, I said. Not her face? Asked Gabby. I don't think so, I said. But it could be her face? She hasn't got any whiskers, I said. Maybe she shaved them off, gasped Gabby. Are you totally sure your mum isn't a secret witch? I'm not sure of anything anymore, I said. Me neither, frowned Gabby. Me neither. Chapter 8. When we went back to class after morning break on Friday, me and Gabby absolutely, totally definitely, 1,000,100% promised each other that we wouldn't listen to one single word more that Jack Beachwhistle said about Halloween for the entire total rest of the week. Cross our hearts and hope to die. Trouble is, I had strawberry jam sandwiches in my lunch box. The trouble with strawberry jam sandwiches is they look like blood sandwiches. At least, Jack Beachwhistle says they do. The trouble with blood sandwiches is that's what vampires eat. At least, Jack Beachwhistle says they do. According to Jack, the only thing vampires eat is blood. They don't eat burgers or chicken nuggets or baked beans or even ice cream. Unless they're blood flavor. Jack says vampires are a bloodthirsty cross between a ghost and a zombie. Except, instead of wearing sheets, they wear black capes, and instead of gunging you to death, they suck all your blood out with their evil teeth. Plus, and this is the scariest bit, they can turn themselves into bats. Not cricket bats, the ones that fly around upside down in the sky at night. The trouble with upside-down bats that fly around in the sky at night is, if you leave your window open at midnight on Halloween night when there's a full moon, they can fly into your bedroom when you're sleeping and get you. I think they can even get you if you're awake. Jack Beachwhistle says as soon as a vampire bat flies into your bedroom at night, it turns the right way up, magics into a proper-sized vampire and goes sniffing for blood. Especially if it's midnight on Halloween night when there's a full moon. According to Jack, the only way to scare a vampire away is to put garlic all over your bedroom. Trouble is, my mom doesn't like garlic. She says it's too smelly. Gabby says her mom and dad absolutely love garlic and that they are always putting it in their cooking at home. Which means that at midnight on Halloween night when there's any type of moon, Gabby will be able to defend herself. But what about me? The only thing I'd be able to do is close my bedroom windows and draw my curtains. When I asked Jack if vampire bats could get into your house anywhere else apart from windows, he said no apart from letterboxes, chimneys and cat flaps. The only one of those I haven't got is a cat flap. Gabby said she was sure I wasn't going to get my blood sucked out on Halloween night, and even if I did, all I had to do was scream as loud as I could, and my mom would run into my bedroom and scare the vampire away. But what if my mom is a secret witch? I said. If my mom is a secret witch, she might be out on her undercover broomstick. She might be whizzing through the sky doing undercover cackles or looking for things to do undercover spells on. If she's whizzing around the sky on our broom or our mop or our Hoover, she might not even hear me screaming for help. Our Hoover is really noisy. Hadn't thought of that, said Gabby. I have, I said. I've thought of everything. Except I hadn't. Because as soon as we'd put our lunch boxes away, Jack gave us the Hooly Hooly Man to think about as well. Chapter 9. The trouble with the Hooly Hooly Man is I never really knew who he was. I'd heard my friends talking about him at Vicky Caro Halloween party, but to be honest, I don't think anyone I know has ever really known who he truly is or where he truly comes from. Or what he truly looks like. Or what he truly does. Jack Beachwhistle did, though. According to Jack Beachwhistle, the Hooly Hooly Man isn't made out of sheets, gunge, bats or even meat. He's a skeleton made out of cobwebs. Or at least he's a skeleton with so many cobwebs on him, he looks like he's made out of cobwebs. When Jack told everyone how the Hooly Hooly Man turned into a skeleton covered in cobwebs, he didn't even need to whisper, it was so scary. Apparently about 1,000 years ago, a farmer's boy called Fernando received an invitation to a Halloween party. Fernando lived in a small village at the bottom of a mountain. On top of the mountain was a castle, and inside the castle lived the people who were having the party. What Fernando didn't know was that he was the only person in the village who had been sent an invitation. What he also didn't know was that the people in the castle who invited him weren't people at all, they were ghosts. Not the ugly ones with sheets on their heads. The ones without sheets that look normal. When Fernando arrived at the party, everything seemed all right. There was lemonade and party hats and everything. But just before midnight, as the full moon began to rise, the ghosts asked Fernando if he wanted to play Halloween hide-and-seek. Because Fernando was so little, he was really good at hide-and-seek, and so he was really keen to play. Run, Fernando. Hide, Fernando, said the ghosts, covering their eyes and then turning to face the wall. Hide in the very best place you can, and we will come looking for you when we've counted to 100. Fernando ran to the west wing of the castle and found a small wardrobe in a child's nursery to hide in. Once inside, he closed the door, hugged his knees, and waited. And waited and waited and waited. Days went past. Weeks went past. Months went past, and still no one came looking for Fernando. Years went past, leap years went past, and still there was no sign of Fernando ever being found. After about 35 years, Fernando gave up hiding and tried to get out of the wardrobe. But he couldn't, because he wasn't a little boy anymore, he had grown up into a man. Why didn't the ghosts go looking for him? Gabby asked. They did, said Jack, but only once they'd finished doing all of their counting. They only had to count to 100. I said. 100 years, whispered Jack. When ghosts play Halloween hide-and-seek, they don't count up to 100 in ones, they count up to 100 in years. 100 in years, everyone gasped. 100 in years. Jack nodded. 100 years later, when the ghosts finally went looking for Fernando, ready or not, all they found in the wardrobe was the wedged-in skeleton of a grown man in a party hat covered in cobwebs. Fernando, gasped Gabby. Fernando, said Jack. Fernando had climbed into his hiding place a boy, but had died in his hiding place a man that legend now calls the Hooly Hooly Man, just a party hat, cobwebs and bones. It was the most blood-freezing story anyone in the playground had ever heard. Why did he change his name from Fernando to the Hooly Hooly Man? I asked. He was adopted by owls, said Jack. It was owls who went hoo-hoo that kept him alive all those years, by flying into the nursery and feeding him field mice. You are RRGGGH, said Gabby. Field mice? I wouldn't eat a field mouse if I was the last owl on Earth. You would if your life depended on it, said Jack. Why didn't the owls tell Fernando that the ghosts were counting up to 100 in years, asked Barry Morley. Why didn't the owls tell Fernando's mom and dad that he was trapped in the castle, asked Sanjay Lepore. Who knows, whispered Jack. The only thing I can tell you is that at midnight on Halloween night when the moon is full, the Hooly Hooly Man goes hunting. Hunting for what? I gasped. A new wardrobe to hide in. Jack shivered. The trouble with new wardrobes to hide in is the one in my bedroom is only 3 months old. Plus it's got really nice handles on the doors. What if he chose a nearly new one with really nice handles? I said, not wanting to give too much away. The only way to stop the Hooly Hooly Man once he's inside your wardrobe is to grab his party hat, tear it into 100 pieces and then get all the cobwebs off him with a feather duster, said Jack, as we walked back to class for afternoon lessons. A feather duster made out of golden dodo feathers. But golden dodo feathers are extinct, said Gabby. Exactly, said Jack. And so will you be if the Hooly Hooly Man comes knocking tomorrow night. Especially if it's midnight, you're alone in your bedroom, the owls are hooting, the werewolves are howling, the zombies are gunging, the witches are cackling, the vampires are flapping, your mom is asleep, and there's a full moon. Chapter 10. When I woke up on Saturday morning, all I wanted to do was stay in bed and hide under my covers. Because now it wasn't just Halloween week anymore, it was actual Halloween night day. Trouble is, Mum said I had to come downstairs for my breakfast. When does Halloween night day stop and Halloween night actually start? I asked her. It doesn't start at all in our house, Daisy, she said. In our house, October the 31st is just a day like any other day. But if we lived in someone else's house, what time in the day would Halloween night actually begin? I haven't really thought about it, said Mom. I'd thought about it a lot. Say we lived in Jack Beachwhistle's house. I said. Would Halloween night start when it starts to get dark, or would it start when everything outside is well dark? If we lived in Jack Beachwhistle's house, then it would probably be Halloween all day every day, said Mum. What if someone knocked on our door at 9 o'clock in the morning and said, trick or treat? Would that mean Halloween day had finished and Halloween night had started? No, Daisy, it wouldn't, said Mom. Trick-or-treaters don't knock on doors on Halloween morning. Trick-or-treaters are only allowed to go trick-or-treating at nighttime. Jack Beachwhistle says he never goes trick-or-treating, I said. You surprise me, said Mom. Jack Beachwhistle says he only goes trick-or-tricking. That doesn't surprise me, said Mom. Jack Beachwhistle says treats are for wimps. Does he now? Said Mom. You should hear some of the Halloween tricks Jack Beachwhistle says he's done on people, I said. I have a feeling I'm about to, sighed Mom. He's put a real alive python through someone's letterbox, I said. He's put soldier ants down someone's chimney. And he's filled a post box with super-sucking quicksand. Once he even took the batteries out of a lighthouse, so the lights didn't work. Loads of ships crashed onto the rocks because of his trick-or-tricking. I'm sure his mom and dad will be very pleased to hear that, said Mom. His mom and dad don't care, I told her. Jack says he's allowed to do whatever he wants whenever he wants to do it. He says he can go out on his bike anywhere he wants, as late as he wants. Even when there's a full moon. I doubt that very much, said Mom. It's true. I told her. It's true. Chapter 11. The trouble with full moons is I wasn't sure what time of day they started either, so as soon as I had finished my breakfast I went out into my back garden to get a good look at the sky. Hello, Daisy, said our neighbor Mrs. Pike. Are you trick-or-treating tonight? We don't do Halloween, I told her. Don't do Halloween? She gasped. I love Halloween. I adore Halloween. How can anyone not do Halloween? When I was a girl, Halloween was my favorite night of the year. All those ghosties and ghoulies and long-leggedy beasties and things that go bump in the night. It's so scary. It's so frightening. It's so exciting. Surely everyone does Halloween? We don't, I said. But she wasn't listening. Let's have a pumpkin off, she said. You carve yours, I'll carve mine, and we'll get the nation to vote on whose is best. We don't do pumpkins either, I told her. Don't do pumpkins? She gasped. I love carving pumpkins. I adore carving pumpkins. Surely everyone carves pumpkins on Halloween? The trouble with saying you don't do Halloween or pumpkins to someone is the someone you say it to should really understand you don't do Halloween or pumpkins. Especially if it's a grown-up someone. But Mrs. Pike didn't seem to understand at all. Why don't you come round for Halloween, she said. You could carve a pumpkin and then we could go trick-or-treating together. You would love trick-or-treating, Daisy, Mrs. Pike said. I so much fun. Do you like sweets? If you like sweets, you'll love trick-or-treating. It was just my luck. All I'd wanted to do was go back to bed and hide under my covers, but all Mrs. Pike wanted to do was talk about carving pumpkins and trick-or-treating. Carve a pumpkin? I didn't want to go anywhere near a pumpkin. Especially after the things Jack Beachwhistle told me when school ended on Friday. Did you know, if the pumpkin you buy is haunted, the teeth you carve with your pumpkin carver can actually turn round and bite you? Jack told me. Did you know that, on average, 97 children get at least one finger bitten off by haunted pumpkins each year? 53 end up losing an arm. Jack told me. Mrs. Pike didn't seem to know half as much about pumpkins as Jack Beachwhistle. Or Halloween sweets. Did you know that Halloween sweets are poisonous? Jack says they are, so if you get any when you go trick-or-treating, whatever you do, don't eat them. Jack says you should give them all to him. When I told Mrs. Pike I didn't do pumpkins or poison, she still didn't seem to understand what I was saying. It was almost like she had been put under a special Halloween spell herself. I know, Daisy. Why don't you and me have a special Halloween afternoon and evening together? Come round at 4. I've got some pumpkins that need carving and some fizzy blood that needs drinking, and then afterwards we can go trick-or-treating together too. Fizzy blood? Things were getting serious now. I needed an escape plan and I needed one fast. I'll have to go and ask my mom, I said. Why don't you ask her now? Said Mrs. Pike. She's standing right behind you. When I turned round and realized that Mum had come out to rake the lawn, I was so relieved. I was absolutely sure she would save me. But she didn't. Brilliant idea, Veronica, she said. Daisy's been going on about Halloween all week. Of course she can go trick-or-treating with you tonight. Then I can make a trifle for Sunday lunch while she's gone. I'm going to take Daisy in my car to the best trick-or-treating road I know, said Mrs. Pike. And then things got even worse. Don't forget to dress up, she said. Chapter 12. Did you know that if you're still wearing a Halloween costume at midnight on Halloween night when there's a full moon, you will turn into the actual Halloween person you are pretending to be? Even if you've taken the costume off and it's on your bedroom floor, the bad magic can still happen. Jack Beachwhistle told me. There was no way I was going to get turned into a Halloween anything by dressing up in a costume for Halloween. And anyway, I didn't have anything that I could dress up as. Put a sheet over your head and go as a ghost, said Mom, completely forgetting that I'd done that before. I wore a sheet to Vicky Caro, I told her. And anyway, I'm bigger now. Cut 2 eye holes in the tablecloth instead, she laughed. Don't you need the tablecloth for Sunday lunch? I asked. I was joking, said Mom. Go as a vampire. I'll ask Nanny if you can borrow her false teeth. Won't Nanny need her teeth for Sunday lunch? I asked. I was joking again, sighed Mom. That's the trouble with jokes, they're only jokes if they're funny. Manan, I know, go as the witch from Snow White, she said. You can borrow an apple out of the fruit bowl. We've only got bananas in the fruit bowl, I said. What about going as Snow Gorilla then? Laughed Mom. Gorillas love bananas. You can borrow the whole bunch, if you like. I'll sort my own costume out, thank you, I told her, going back to my bedroom to think of ideas. The trouble with ideas for Halloween costumes is they are really hard to think of. Especially if you know you might turn into the actual Halloween person you are pretending to be. There was no way I wanted to turn into a werewolf or a witch or even a poltergeist, which is just as well actually, because there's no wolf hair or black pointy hats in my house to make costumes out of. There isn't even a frog or a newt. After about an hour I was starting to think I would have to go as a ghost, because ghost costumes were the only ones I knew how to make. I even got the scissors out and everything. But then, suddenly, I had a genius idea. It was like a wizard had tapped me on the shoulder with a magic wand and given me just the costume idea I had been searching for. All I had to do next was make it. Moo! I shouted. Please will you go up in the loft? What do you want me to go up in the loft for? My mum shouted back. I need you to look in the Christmas box. I explained. The trouble with our Christmas box is it goes up in the loft as soon as Christmas is over. If you ask me, all the things you need for Christmas are just as exciting all the other months of the year, so it would be a much better idea if the Christmas box stayed in my bedroom all year round. But my mom always says no. What do you want out of the Christmas box? She asked, not shouting any more because she was at the bottom of the stairs. I need a cracker for my Halloween costume, I said. Can you see if there are any crackers left over from Christmas, please? The trouble with crackers left over from Christmas is they are exactly the sort of thing children should be allowed to pull all the other months of the year. But my mom always says no to that too. If they are good enough to pull this Christmas, they will be good enough to pull next Christmas, she always says. You are not pulling them for the sake of pulling them. They are going up in the loft. The trouble with going up in lofts is that lofts are really creepy. Even the creak of the loft ladder is creepy. I've never actually been right up the ladder and into our loft. I've stood on the top step and looked in with a torch, but I've never actually dared to go inside. There is no way I would go up into an actual loft on actual Halloween night day or night. There could be all sorts of creepy loft monsters hiding up there. How many do you want? My mum shouted down through the hatch. How many can I have? I shouted back. How many do you need? She shouted back. One, I shouted. Then you can have one, she said. The costume I'd thought of making was perfect, because it was midnight and there was a full moon, I would be able to change out of it really fast. Do you need any help making something to wear? Asked Mum. You can help me pull, I said, holding out the cracker and then getting quite excited. I'd never pulled a Christmas cracker in October before. Snap! It went. Brilliant! I went. I had everything I needed. All I had to do now was make my costume and get changed. When I came down from my bedroom just before 4 o'clock, I decided to creep down the stairs and give my mum the biggest shock of her life. Rah! I shouted, jumping into the kitchen and taking her completely by surprise. When my mum turned round and saw me, I'm not sure she knew what to say. For quite a long time actually, she didn't seem to know what to say. Okay, Daisy, I give up, she said. Which Halloween horror are you meant to be? I'm Fernando before he turned into the Hooly Hooly Man, course. I told her. Of course you are, said my mum. Chapter 13. Once I'd got used to being dressed up in a Halloween costume, Elle actually started to feel okay about going to see Mrs. Pike. I mean, I looked really good, in an emergency I could get changed really quickly, and who knows, doing Halloween things with Mrs. Pike might not be so bad after all. Trouble is, when I opened my front door at 4 o'clock and looked out into the street, it wasn't just getting dark, it was getting foggy too. Really, really, really foggy. The trouble with fog is it makes everything look really ghostly. Do you want me to come with you to knock on Mrs. Pike's door? Asked Mom. Yes, please, gulped. The trouble with stepping out of your house into a front garden that's filling up with Halloween fog is it feels like ghosts are creeping all around you and touching your face with cold wispy fingers. Things got even creepier when we got to Mrs. Pike's garden gate, because do you know what was lined up along her drive all the way to her front door? You'll never believe it. Not one scary pumpkin but 10. With lit-up candles inside them too. I couldn't tell if the pumpkins were haunted ones or not, but you should have seen their teeth. They were like sharks. Where do you think Mrs. Pike is going to take me in the car? I asked. She's asked me not to tell you, said Mum, but I promise you it will be fun. By the time we got to Mrs. Pike's front doorstep, all I wanted to do was go home. Because do you know what was dangling from the door knocker? A great big hairy spider. There was no way I was going to knock on a door knocker like that. Trouble is, my mum did the knocking instead. When the front door opened and Mrs. Pike looked down at me, I nearly wet myself. I wasn't even sure I was looking at Mrs. Pike. Because instead of wearing Mrs. Pike-type clothes, the person in front of me had a long red dress on, a black silky cape, green pointy shoes, and hair that didn't look like Mrs. Pike hair at all. And you should have seen her face. It wasn't Mrs. Pike color in the slightest. It was whiter than the fog. Well, most of it was. Her eyes were purple. And her chin had been dribbled on with red blood. Didn't you know Mrs. Pike was a vampire, Daisy? Mom smiled. Have a lovely time together, won't you? I'm off to make some trifle. When Mum turned round and left me alone on the doorstep with an actual vampire, I couldn't believe it. When Mrs. Pike said, "Welcome to my house of horror, Daisy," I nearly fainted, because do you know what else I saw when she smiled? White, pointy vampire teeth. The trouble with fainting is it makes it really easy for a vampire to suck all your blood out because you can't put up a struggle. So I had to not faint and go into her house instead. Mrs. Pike's hallway was the creepiest hallway LD ever seen. There were cobwebs all over the walls, there were more gnashing pumpkins going up the stairs, there were more giant spiders hanging from a lampshade, there was even a right way up bat dangling from the handle of the kitchen door. "Would you like some fizzy blood, Daisy?" said Mrs. Pike. "It tastes just like cherryade." The trouble with fizzy blood is I had never drunk fizzy blood before. It wasn't the fizzy I didn't fancy, it was the blood. Did, because I had to. Because if a vampire tells you to do something, you have to do it. Or she might bite you. When I asked Mrs. Pike if she had orange squash instead, she told me to follow her into the kitchen. "So I don't have any orange squash, Daisy," said Mrs. Pike, taking a plastic bottle out of her cupboard. "But I do have this." She smiled. "It looks and tastes like orange squash, but actually it's goblin juice. I'm telling you, if I could have turned myself into a vampire bat and flown straight out of the kitchen window, I definitely would have. But I couldn't. So I didn't. And anyway, the kitchen window was closed." "There you are, Daisy," said Mrs. Pike, pouring me a glass of goblin juice and herself a glass of fizzy blood. "Thank you so much for coming to see me this afternoon. And may I just say a very happy Halloween to us both." Chapter 14. Once I was absolutely sure Mrs. Pike wasn't going to suck all my blood out, I started to relax. In fact, I even tried the fizzy blood too. And guess what? It tasted exactly like cherryade. Mrs. Pike said she always had fizzy blood to drink on Halloween night when she was my age. The fizziest thing I had ever had on Halloween night before was milk. "Do you think I could do a pumpkin?" I asked. "I've never done a pumpkin before." "Of course you can, Daisy," said Mrs. Pike. "I just need to fetch it in from the garden." When Mrs. Pike came back in, she was carrying the biggest pumpkin I had ever seen. "I saved the best one for you," she said, lowering it down onto the kitchen table. The trouble with lowering a pumpkin down onto a kitchen table is it makes you realize how big a pumpkin can be. The pumpkin Mrs. Pike had given me to carve was ginormous. But the goo inside it was even better. The trouble with goo is I'm not allowed to have goo at home, in case I get too gooey. But once we'd cut a star shape in the top of the pumpkin and lifted it off, Mrs. Pike let me put my hand right inside. The goo inside a pumpkin is immense. Because not only is it all squidgy and cold, it is full of millions and millions of slimy seeds. The more I sloshed my hand around, the more the goo and the slime and the seeds slithered and slimed around my fingers. To be honest, I'd have been quite happy just squishing and squashing and squidging goo around with my hands, but Mrs. Pike said that we had to get all the goo out of the pumpkin before we could start doing the carving. The trouble with getting pumpkin goo out is it doesn't all come out at once. Some of it you can scoop out with your hands. The rest of it you have to scrape out with a big spoon, because the edges of the inside of a pumpkin are a bit stringy. Because it was such a big pumpkin, we decided I would get all the goo I could out with my hands, and Mrs. Pike would do the rest with the spoon. You should have seen how full our goo bowl was when we'd finished. After we'd rinsed and dried our hands, Mrs. Pike said we were ready to start carving. The trouble with carving is, if you haven't done it before, then it's best if you let a vampire show you how first. Especially if you're using a pumpkin carver that is really sharp. Mrs. Pike's pumpkin carver was the business. It had an orange plastic handle and a really thin crinkly blade. Okay, Daisy, she said, the first thing we need to do is decide which side of the pumpkin we want the face to be, and then we need to cut out the first eye. Cutting out pumpkin eyes is really tricky. First you have to work out where the very top of the first eye is going to be, then you have to push the crinkly bit of the carver right through the pumpkin skin in exactly the right spot. Now we start carving, said Mrs. Pike, using the pumpkin carver like a saw to cut out a triangle shape. Mrs. Pike was an expert. Her triangle shape was brilliant, not too big and not too small, plus, when she pressed it out with her thumb, the hole that was left behind looked exactly like a scary pumpkin eye. Right, Daisy, she said, handing me the pumpkin carver. Your turn. When I held the pumpkin carver for the first time, I felt a bit nervous. But guess what? I was an expert too. Finished, I said, once LD done all of the face and everything. Daisy, that's brilliant, said Mrs. Pike. That's absolutely amazing, only, where are the teeth? I don't want him to have teeth, told her. I just want him to have eyes and a nose. But why don't you want him to have a mouth? Asked Mrs. Pike. You don't want to know, I said after we cleared all the pumpkin things away and had another drink of fizzy blood. Mrs. Pike took the lid off the pumpkin I'd carved, put a candle inside and lit it. You should have seen how orange and flickery the eyes and nose looked then. It was brilliant. It looked even better with the kitchen lights off. Would you like me to tell you some scary stories, Daisy? Mrs. Pike asked. No, thank you, I said. Would you like me to put some makeup on you and turn you into a vampire, just like me? She asked. No, thank you, I said. Would you like me to? No, thank you, I said. Can we just have some more fizzy blood and then maybe talk about nice things instead? Right you are, said Mrs. Pike. Open another bottle. Once we'd drunk another bottle of fizzy blood and LD finished telling Mrs. Pike all about me, we suddenly realized how late it was. Goodness me, Mrs. Pike said, looking at her watch. Is that the time already? What time is it? I asked, poking my tongue out to try and see if my tongue had gone red. It's trick-or-treating time, she said, clapping her hands. Chapter 15. The trouble with trick-or-treating time is I had never gone trick-or-treating before, so I didn't really know what kind of time I was going to have. I'd always kind of secretly wanted to try trick-or-treating, but only in the road I live in. Because then LD be close to my mom if I had to run home. Trouble is, Mrs. Pike wanted to go trick-or-treating somewhere else. If I tell you the road we are going to, Daisy, it will spoil the surprise, she said, blowing out the candle in my pumpkin and then getting ready to leave the house. Make sure you wrap up warm, she said, before blowing out all the candles and the pumpkins on the stairs. I will, I said, following her to the door and getting my coat from the coat hook. Make sure you do up all the buttons, she said, before picking up a black bin bag. I will, I said, tucking my jumper into my trousers first to make me extra safe. Okay then, said Mrs. Pike, opening the front door. Let's do this. The trouble with opening a front door and doing this is, when I looked outside, I didn't feel like doing this at all. Because it wasn't Halloween night afternoon anymore, it was actual Halloween night. Plus, it was really foggy too. Isn't it exciting, Daisy, said Mrs. Pike, jingling her car keys above her head. Isn't it atmospheric? I'm going to have to turn on my fog lights. The trouble with fog lights is I wasn't sure what fog lights were. But as soon as Mrs. Pike switched them on, I found out. They made Halloween night fog look even ghostlier. And they showed you how hard fog is to see through. The trouble with not being able to see through fog is, when I looked up at the sky, there was absolutely no way I could see if there was a full moon or not. When we drove past my front gate, I could barely see my house. Look, Daisy. Trick-or-treaters, said Mrs. Pike when we got to the top of my road. It was Rocco and Trixie, the children who live at number 7. They were trick-or-treating with their mom. Look, Daisy. More trick-or-treaters, she said as we turned slowly into the next road and drove all the way to the end. The more roads we drove along, the more trick-or-treaters we saw. Some of them I even recognized from school. We didn't just see trick-or-treaters either. We saw some really weird things too. Look! There's Christopher Leak, said Mrs. Pike. Who's Christopher Leak? Asked. Oh, he's a vampire vegetable, she said. His brother is Count Dracula. Are you really a real actual vampire? Asked Mrs. Pike when we stopped at the first set of traffic lights. Goodness no, Daisy, she laughed. There's no such thing as real vampires, didn't your mom tell you? I'm just pretending to be a vampire for Halloween. I'm just pretending to be Fernando, the boy who played hide-and-seek with ghosts and ended up as a skeleton covered in cobwebs, I told her. Ah, of course, said Mrs. Pike. I thought that was who you had come as. I made my costume myself, told her. Apart from Mom helping me pull the cracker, I did absolutely everything by myself. You look fabulous, said Mrs. Pike. Absolutely fabulous. It was so foggy when Mrs. Pike finally parked the car, I had no idea where we were at all. Even if the street lights had been fog lights, I wouldn't have been able to see where we were. Welcome, Daisy. Mrs. Pike said, undoing her seatbelt and then grabbing the black bin bag from the back seat. Welcome, my dear, to Church Road. Chapter 16. The trouble with Church Road is I'd never been to Church Road before. Not even in the day. So I had no idea what it was like. All I could see was fog. Church Road is a wonderful road for trick-or-treating in, Daisy, said Mrs. Pike. I used to come trick-or-treating here when I was a girl. Now, here's a torch for you to shine, and here's a can of silly string for you to squirt. Are you ready to get started, Daisy? I guess so, said. Then let's start at number 1, she said. It was a good job Mrs. Pike had given me a torch because it helped us find the gate to the first house. Now then, Daisy, said Mrs. Pike. This is what we'll do. We'll knock on the front door of every house in the road, and if they open it, we'll shout trick or treat. If the person who opens the door says treat, they'll give you a treat, like a sweet or some fruit. If the person who opens the door says trick, then you must squirt them with your silly string and then run. When I found out that trick-or-treating meant I got to squirt people with silly string and then run, I started to feel much less nervous straight away. I love squirting people with silly string. Even people I don't know. What if no one comes to the door? Asked. We go to the next house, said Mrs. Pike. What do I do if people give me treats? I ask you put them in this black bin bag, she said. Good, because there is no way I'm going to eat them, I told her. Walking through the fog to my first ever trick-or-treating door felt really weird. Especially with a grown-up dressed as a vampire behind me. I'll ring the doorbell, said Mrs. Pike, leaning over me and pressing it with one of her long purple fingernails. You get ready to say trick or treat. As soon as the doorbell rang, I put my hand inside my coat pocket. As soon as the door opened, I got ready to squirt my silly string. Trick or treat, shouted Mrs. Pike, before I'd even had a chance to say or do anything. Treat, said the lady, holding out a big box of sweets. The trouble with ladies saying treat is it means you're not allowed to squirt them with silly string. You have to take a sweet out of the box instead. Take 2, take 3, said the lady. Did she think I was mad? Thank you so much, said Mrs. Pike, holding the bag out for me to drop my poison sweet into and then waving goodbye to the lady. "Happy Halloween!" "What a good start," she said as we headed back down the path in the direction of house number 2. Good start? It was a rubbish start, if you ask me. All I wanted to do was squirt someone with silly string. The trouble with wanting to squirt someone with silly string is if everyone who opens their door says treat, then there is no way you can do it. And guess what? The lady at number 2, Church Road, said treat. The man at number 3, Church Road, said treat. The children at number 4 said treat, and the lady at number 5 said treat. The people at numbers 6 and 9 didn't say treat, but that was only because they didn't answer the door. Everyone else all the way up to house number 12 kept on saying treat. It was so unfair. If someone doesn't answer, can I squirt their door instead? I asked Mrs. Pike. "Oh, no, Daisy," she said. "You don't want to waste your silly string on a silly old front door, you want to squirt it all over someone. Let's keep going. Our bag is really filling up, you know. Perhaps the people at number 13 will say trick. Let's go and see." So we went and saw. And just my luck, it was just treat. 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 All the way. By the time we got to the middle of Church Road, I'd been given a poison toffee, a poison packet of refreshers, 3 poison lollipops, 2 poison apples, a poison strawberry chew, a poison banana flump, a packet of poison crisps, 4 poison mints, a packet of poison chewing gum, and a poison sugar rat that wasn't a sugar rat at all, it was a sugar mouse. Because I've seen sugar mice before. And anyway, sugar rats would be far too scary to eat. By the time we got to the end of the road, I had lost count of how many poisonous things we had in the bag. All I knew was, I hadn't got to squirt anyone with my silly string. Not even a teensy squirt. Or even a weensy squirt. Because everyone in Church Road only knows how to say treat. And not trick. It was so annoying. "Wasn't that wonderful?" said Mrs. Pike, shining her torch back down the path of number 32. "Wasn't that fun?" "I told you it would be fun, didn't one, Daisy? But I'm afraid this is the end of Church Road." The trouble with the end of Church Road is it meant there would be no more chances to squirt my silly string. "Can't we go back the other way and do the houses on the other side of the road too?" I asked. "There are no houses on the other side of Church Road, Daisy," said Mrs. Pike, flashing her torch through the fog. "All you'll see is fields." When Mrs. Pike said there were fields on the other side of Church Road, I didn't believe her at first. I'd never heard of roads that didn't have houses on both sides, but when I pointed my torch in the same direction as hers, I saw that it was true. There were no gates, no walls, no houses, no front doors, there weren't even any street lamps on the other side of Church Road. All there was fog. "Number 32 is the very last building in the road, Daisy," said Mrs. Pike, flashing her torch through the fog. "Unless you include the church." The trouble with including churches is trick-or-treaters should never include churches. Especially churches in the dark in the fog in the countryside on Halloween night. Anyone knows that. Except Mrs. Pike. "Wait a moment. You've given me an idea, Daisy," she suddenly said, putting her arm round me and leading me towards a creepy, creaky, cobwebby wooden gate. "Let's include the church. You'll love the church at the end of Church Road, Daisy, especially the church at the end of Church Road on Halloween." "Will I be able to squirt the vicar with silly string?" I asked, squeezing through the gate. "I'm not sure the vicar will be in the church at this time of night," Mrs. Pike whispered. "But I'll tell you what you can do," she said, shining her torch under her chin and making her face look super creepy. "Are you feeling brave, Daisy?" "Not really," said. "Are you feeling really, really brave, Daisy?" she whispered. I don't think so, I said. But she still wasn't listening. You can play murder in the graveyard with me, she cackled. Chapter 17. The trouble with grown-ups who don't have any children is there is no way they should be allowed anywhere near other people's children. Especially on Halloween night. Was I feeling brave? No, I was not. Did I want to play murder in the graveyard? No, I did not. I mean, what kind of grown-up takes a child anywhere near a graveyard in the dark in the fog in the countryside on Halloween night and then says, let's play murder in the graveyard? Trouble is, before I could even say anything, Mrs. Pike was already telling me the rules. Now then, Daisy, she said, close your eyes and start counting while I go and find a gravestone to hide behind. As soon as you've counted to 100, shout, I'm coming to murder you, ready or not, and then use your torch to come and find me. As soon as you find the gravestone I'm hiding behind, you can murder me with your silly string. I couldn't believe my ears. Not only had Mrs. Pike taken me to a graveyard in the dark in the fog in the countryside on Halloween night, now she was going to run off and leave me all alone, with only a torch and some silly string to defend myself with. There was no way I was closing my eyes. What if an owl or a werewolf or a zombie or a witch or a vampire tried to get me while she was hiding? What if the hooly man came along looking for a new wardrobe? It's a good job I didn't close my eyes too. Because if I hadn't kept my torch on and my eyes open while Mrs. Pike was running away from me, I would never have seen her disappear. Yes, disappear. Completely out of sight. Just like that. In the dark. In the fog. Right before my very eyes. It was like a magic trick. 1 second she was there. The next second she was gone. But where had she gone? And how had she gone? Was she actually a vampire after all? And if she was, had she turned into a bat and flown away? And if she had turned into a bat and flown away, was she flying in my direction looking for blood? I was so shocked, I couldn't move, I couldn't think, I could barely even remember my own name. At least, I couldn't until a voice in the foggy darkness shouted, Daisy. It was the voice of Mrs. Pike. Daisy, she shouted again. I've fallen down a hole. Come and help me. Chapter 18. The trouble with someone playing murder in the graveyard and then falling down a hole is, Mrs. Pike had fallen down a whopper. In fact, the hole she had fallen into was so deep, I couldn't even see the top of her head. At least I couldn't until I shone my torch down onto her face. Daisy, you need to help me, Mrs. Pike said, reaching up with her arm. It's all muddy and cold and wet down here. Please try and pull me out. The trouble with trying to pull a grown-up out of a deep hole is you need to be much bigger than me to be able to do it. We need to phone for help, Daisy, said Mrs. Pike. Can you go back to my car? If I give you my car keys, do you think you could go and fetch my phone? It's in my handbag. Was she serious? Not only was I standing in a graveyard in the dark in the fog staring at a vampire down a hole, now I was going to have to walk through a graveyard, past a church, through a gate, past 32 houses, right to the very end of Church Road in the dark in the fog in the countryside on Halloween night all on my own. And then all the way back again. On second thoughts, Daisy, she said, you'd better stay here with me. Your mom would never forgive me if I lost you. As soon as Mrs. Pike changed her mind, I was totally sure she wasn't a real vampire. A real vampire would definitely have made a child get their mobile from a car. Plus, thinking about it, a real vampire would have turned into a bat and flown out of the hole. Mrs. Pike definitely couldn't fly. All she could do was jump and scrabble and slip and slide and scrabble and fall over in the mud. Do you want me to go and knock on the door of number 32 again? I asked, really hoping she would say no. No, Daisy. I'm not letting you out of my sight for another minute, she said. We'll just have to wait till someone comes along. The trouble with waiting for someone to come along is not many people come along in a graveyard in the dark in the fog in the countryside on Halloween night. Who do you think might come along? I asked. The vicar, hopefully, she said, or a choir. Not a zombie? I said. No, not a zombie, Daisy, she said. There are no such things as zombies. Not a vampire? Said. No, not a vampire, Daisy, she said. I've told you before, there are no such things as vampires. Not a ghost or a witch or a poltergeist or the hooly man. I said, flashing my torch down onto her face and expecting her to say no to those too. Except she didn't. She didn't speak. She didn't blink. All she did was point into the fog with her torch. What's wrong? Said, starting to get a bit nervous and then jumping out of my skin when her lips suddenly started working. Behind you, Daisy. Mrs. Pike trembled. Behind you. Honestly, I have never spun round so fast in my life. When I saw what was behind me, I nearly died on the spot. It was a skeleton. And it was staring straight at me. Quick as a flash, I grabbed my silly string and fired. Squirt. 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 Chapter 19. It was only when I'd run out that I realized it was a skeleton on a bike. Hello, Daisy, said Jack Beachwhistle, wiping the string off his face. What's she doing down that hole? When I heard Jack Beachwhistle's voice coming out of the skeleton's face, I was so relieved. I'd never been so pleased to see him in my life. She's trying to get out, I said. Sorry for squirting you. Her name is Mrs. Pike. She's my neighbor. We were playing murder in the graveyard. When Jack found out LD'd been playing murder in the graveyard, he was really impressed. Especially murder in the graveyard in the dark in the fog in the countryside on Halloween night. I come here on my bike every Halloween night, he said, to see if there are any zombies that need teaching a lesson. Me too, fibbed. Do you like my skeleton hoodie? He asked. I's got trousers too, he said, pointing at the bones on his legs. Yes, they're really good, I fibbed again. So why doesn't she climb out? Asked Jack, walking to the edge of the hole and looking down. She's tried to, but she keeps slipping on the mud, I whispered. I bet I could climb my way out of there, he said. I could climb my way out of any hole, however deep, because I've got escape skills. And by the way, it's not a hole, it's a grave. Someone is going to be buried there next week. When I realized that Mrs. Pike was trapped inside a hole that wasn't a hole but a grave, I shivered from top to toe. What if no one can get her out? Gasped. Then she'll have to be buried alongside the coffin, Jack whispered. I wasn't sure if Mrs. Pike knew she was in a grave or not, or if she could hear what we were saying. But when she started waving and flashing her torch beam across our faces, I knew she wanted us to get her out fast. Do you think we could both lift her out? I asked Jack. Normally, I'd lift her out on my own, he whispered, but I sprained my shoulder this morning doing black belt jiu-jitsu training with Colin and Harry. Which might have been a fib. I wasn't sure. Why hasn't she rung for help on her mobile? Asked Jack. Her phone is in the car, whispered. Where's her car? Whispered Jack. At the beginning of Church Road, I told him. Who was she going to ring? Asked Jack. My mom, I told him. I'll go and get her, he said. Chapter 20. Where do you live? Jack asked, speeding back up the church path again. 14 Bilberry Way, I told him. I'll be as quick as I can, he promised. Chapter 21. It was about half an hour before my mum finally came to rescue Mrs. Pike. When she appeared out of the fog, I thought she was a ghost, her face looked so white. But ghosts don't carry stepladders. At least, I don't think they do. My mum had been really worried about us. Apparently she had been ringing Mrs. Pike to find out where we were. It was a really good idea to bring a stepladder, because Mrs. Pike's hands were so muddy and wet, my mum would never have been able to get hold of her. When Mrs. Pike finally crawled out of the hole, she looked more like a mud monster than a vampire. She even groaned like a mud monster when she stood up. I could barely see the church clock through the fog, but when my mum put her arm around Mrs. Pike and told her everything was going to be all right, I knew it was time to go home. We were at the end of the church path when Jack caught up with us on his bike. I think he'd had to cycle quite a long way to get my mum. "Do you fancy going trick-or-treating?" he asked me as we squeezed through the gate. "It's only 9 o'clock. I've already been trick-or-treating," I told him. "And anyway, I thought you said you only did trick-or-tricking?" "I do," he said. "I was tricking you." When I showed Jack the bag of sweets me and Mrs. Pike had collected, he said they were some of the most poisonous he'd ever seen. So I gave them to him straight away. "It's a good job you didn't eat any of them," he said. "If you had, you would probably have been dead by now, or at the very least your face would have turned purple and yellow and your tongue would have dropped off." "Thanks for taking them," I said. "See you at school on Monday," Jack said, standing up on his pedals and then cycling away into the fog. Chapter 22. When me and Mum arrived home, Mrs. Pike's pumpkins weren't on her driveway anymore. They were in the bin. "I don't think she meant to fall down the hole," said, as Mum opened the front door and let us into the house. It was so dark and foggy in the graveyard, she couldn't see where she was going. "What you were doing playing hide-and-seek games in a graveyard, really do not know," said Mum. "I thought you were going trick-or-treating, not potholing." "It wasn't my idea," I told her. "It was totally Mrs. Pike's idea, not mine." "It doesn't matter whose idea it was." Mum frowned. "It was a bad idea with a capital B." As soon as LD taken off my coat, I had a brilliant idea with a capital M. "Can we play murder in the dark?" I asked. "Please, please, please. Just you and me, no churches, no graveyards, no gravestones or graves to fall into either, just normal murder in the dark in the house." "No, Daisy, we cannot," said Mum. "The only game you are going to play now is getting ready for bed with a capital GRFB." "But tonight is Halloween night," moaned. "Not in our house, it isn't," she growled. The trouble with it not being Halloween night in our house is it blooming well felt like it was Halloween night in our house. Especially after going to a graveyard with a vampire. Double especially after putting my pajamas on. And triple especially after having to walk up the stairs to my bedroom on my own. If only I hadn't peeped through my bedroom curtains to see if there were any vampires outside. The trouble with peeping through my bedroom curtains is that's when I noticed there was a foolish moon. Yes, a foolish moon, peeping through the fog. Not only that, it was looking straight at me. There was no way I could get to sleep knowing there was a foolish moon staring at my curtains. When I heard my mum going to bed later, I couldn't even begin to close my eyes, I was so nervous. I mean, if there was a foolish moon at 10:15, there could be an even fuller moon by 12 o'clock midnight. Especially on Halloween. What if Mom was turning into a witch? What if the zombies were already gunging through the floor of my classroom? What if a haunted headmaster was floating across the playground? What if the hooly man had decided to move into my new wardrobe? What if vampire bats were heading for my letterbox? What if haunted tea towels were coming out of my mom's laundry basket? What if Mrs. Pike's haunted pumpkins were coming to bite me? What if werewolves could sniff the meat for our Sunday lunch? If there was a foolish moon and it was midnight and it was Halloween, anything could happen. It was 11:04. My mom was asleep. The house was all dark. I had Mrs. Pike's torch and 56 minutes to totally build my defenses. Chapter 23. The trouble with building Halloween defenses is you can never be totally sure you've done enough. It was 27 seconds to midnight when I finally dived under my bed covers last night and 9:15 when I finally plucked up the courage to pull back my covers and peep out again this morning. The first thing I noticed was I was still alive. I still had all my blood in me, which meant a vampire hadn't got me. I wasn't covered in cobwebs, which meant I hadn't turned into Fernando. I hadn't been got by a zombie or a werewolf or a ghost. Which meant my Halloween defenses had totally worked. If only I'd had time to tidy up before my mom woke up too. "Morning, Daisy," she said, stopping to wave to me on her way to the loo and then rubbing her eyes. "Oh no, Daisy, you haven't," she said, looking in the toilet. "Oh no, Daisy, you haven't," she said, looking into my bedroom. "Oh no, Daisy, you haven't," she said, looking down the stairs. "Oh no, Daisy, you haven't," she said, going downstairs and into the kitchen. Trouble is, I had. The trouble with thinking my mom is turning into a witch is I had to put all of her undercover wands down the toilet. The trouble with defending myself against vampires is I didn't have any garlics, so I had to use gravy granules instead. The trouble with defending my wardrobe against the hooly man is hammer and nails would have been too noisy, so I had to use sellotape instead. The trouble with needing a feather duster made of golden dodo feathers is I had to use golden syrup instead. The trouble with defending myself against werewolves is I didn't have any silver bullets, so I had to put silver foil on the stairs instead. The trouble with defending myself against haunted tea towels is I didn't have the right color pegs, so I'll gunge them with my mom's liquid tabs instead. The trouble with fighting gunge with gunge is I couldn't find any gunge, so I had to use trifle instead. My mom didn't sound very happy. Daisy. She definitely didn't sound very happy. My best tablecloth. Especially when she found the tablecloth that I'd nearly had to use for my Halloween costume and came stomping back up the stairs. "Oh, it's the mummy,"